Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about the Misfit of Demon King finale. Misfit of Demon King Academy finale. There we go. Episode 13 technically. But yeah, hey man, we're here to chat about it. Now, I have a lot of notes. Why do I have a lot of notes? Because the adaptation, this final episode, was pretty terrible. Like in terms of an adaptation, pretty terrible. There's a lot of things missing. And I do want to talk about that because a lot of things missing. There's, I think, two things missing that are really bad because they ruin the integrity of the arc in terms of what an arc is supposed to do when it finishes or when it gets to its conclusion. It ruins the integrity of the arc. So those are the 2 points that we're going to really talk about at the end of the video. But yeah, as an adaptation, not the strongest thing. I think if I wasn't reading the web novel along with the anime episodes and I had seen the anime episode by itself, given my habits from the previous episodes, I would have probably have criticized this episode for moving so quickly and for not explaining the powers very well. Lots of lackadaisical things. I probably would have, like, the way that this thing is constructed, you can kind of spot that things are just happening all of a sudden. And when you look at the way that the episode chose to convey some ideas, it's also like, well, you clearly aren't giving these characters enough time. This was a situation where the anime episode ultimately sacrifices the characters' motives and actions in return for unnecessary sequences of girls singing, which is really interesting. It's an interesting pick. I'm not very happy with the episode in its final form as a adaptation, as an ending to Demon Lord. It's all right. Like, I mean, if you came in with like low expectations, it's all right. It has enough good moments. It's cool enough. But what they ultimately do with the episode is that they significantly simplify a lot of the characters, and that's like the overall theme. It's aggressive simplification. That's what you're gonna really understand. So what I have for you here is a list of the significant things that they changed. And I'm sure that as you hear what these changes are, I'm sure you're going to say like, oh, well, that seems a little bit more nuanced, or that seems a little bit stranger, because it's specifically within these details that Ray's plans really come apart in terms of what he was doing. And it really like shows what kind of person he was, because some of the things that Ray is ultimately responsible for, they get kind of glossed over in the anime. And also with the way that some things were skipped, it makes me really curious as to whether or not the anime staff believes they will have a season 2. Because the way I'm watching this, when I'm looking at Misfit of Demon King Academy finale, it doesn't seem like they think they're getting a season 2, which is really interesting. And I've looked on the internet, and as of the recording of this video, it doesn't seem there's an announcement for it yet. So let's just keep it in mind. If someone knows that there's an announcement, please let me know. But from what I've seen, I haven't spotted one yet. One more thing I will say is that this information is coming from the web novel, not the light novel. Now, what I will tell you is that very irregularly, the web novel for Demon King Academy is very consistent with the manga. So the web novel's events are still the events of the anime, except the web novel has more information. And the manga too has more information. The manga and the web novel are pretty much locked in step. So I sincerely don't believe, knowing that there's more volumes of the web novel and the light novel, that the web novel is that far off from the light novel. Maybe the light novel has added in more information, but if we're talking even about adding in more information, that's already significantly more than the anime is giving us, if we look at what the web novel is doing. So that's going to be the first portion of the episode, of the video. We're going to go through everything that the anime didn't let the viewers know, because it's unfortunate. This is some of the really cool stuff. This is where we can actually get into the characters and really talk about them, because the characters were doing cool stuff. It's unfortunate when you have an author trying so hard to flesh out as many details as they can, and then you come into the anime and the anime is just showing off a lot of like different special effects and just showing a bunch of girls singing. And like, I'm criticizing the girls singing, but it's an issue of like, if you're gonna spend 2 minutes of just footage of the girls singing, I would really rather you tell me one cool thing about Anos, because there's only like, after the first 30 seconds, what are you getting from watching a bunch of girls sing? Now mind you, It's that finale entertainment aspect. Like maybe you were entertained. That is something that like we're ultimately fighting here. It's like, is the entertainment value worth taking out the nuance? I don't think so. I think if you keep the nuance in here, a lot more people are going to respect Demon King Academy critically, as opposed to just saying like it was a nice time waster. And I think that's ultimately the battle we come down to when it comes to these kind of adaptations. So let me know what you think down below. What do you value more, the information or the integrity to the story, or the entertainment value? And let me know what you think about that singing sequence. I think the parts where the singing was overlaid on scenes happening, I think that's probably the best way to go about it, personally. I think having 2 minutes of girls standing around, especially when they're those girls, not worth it. Anyway, let's begin with the things that the adaptation didn't tell you. I have my notes here. Number one, they don't tell you how hard Ray tried. Ray tells you that he was murdered, and when he was murdered, you see him falling down, and he uses a little sword to stop destiny. And then his explanation is that over time, people forgot. The anime is lying to you. That is not how that went down. So here's what Ray had to say. I was killed by a supporter of Jirga. I pretended to die and just revived immediately, but I realized that Jirga's plan couldn't be stopped anymore unless I took their lives. Later on, Anos had asked, well, how did you take my name away from the demons? And Ray said, we talked and sometimes we fought, but the demons were much more understanding than the humans. Or rather than understanding, they just loved Anos a lot. Eventually, everyone believed Ray and decided to forget Anos Voldigold. And then the whole thing with Evan Mana cutting Anos' destiny just helped make things easier for people to forget. But it doesn't take away how hard Ray tried. And there's more things that go into this whole idea of Ray tried very hard. When we were first introduced to Ray, we learned that he was kicked out of his family. And the reason he was kicked out of his family was because he didn't inherit any of the family techniques. And the reason he didn't inherit those family techniques was because he was a reincarnated person. Now, this is the more interesting thing. Ray had said that he had actually reincarnated so many times, little by little, he obtained bodies that had more and more demon blood. So this was the first time that he ever had a pure-blooded demon, his life as Ray. We're talking about canon here. So what that part was just telling you was that this was something that he was doing consistently throughout the 2,000 years. Ray was there guiding demon society throughout the 2,000 years, or at the very least keeping an eye on it. Which also brings up the thing like, Ray, you let demon society kind of become a little bit too unreasonable, especially when you consider the whole thing about pure blood and not pure blood, sorry, hybrids. Especially when you consider that Anos doesn't care about the quantity of his blood in any particular person. One drop of Anos' blood is enough to legitimize someone as his descendant. Anyway, continuing that, they also didn't tell us what happened with Shin, because Canon in this particular situation was masquerading as if he could possibly be Shin. So here's what actually happened to Shin and the Anos loyalists. Your right hand, Shin Regalia, along with the rest of your trusted advisors, didn't forget your name. Instead, they reincarnated and moved away from the demon country. Even the powerful demon tribes that didn't get along with or follow Anos during the Great War agreed to remain quiet until you returned and everything was over. Alright, cool. Now we know. One, I think it's weird that Shin didn't forget Anos' name, given that Shin was not good at reincarnating the way that Canon was. So that's kind of interesting. But the point here is, well, what happened to that information? Why didn't we get this follow-up? There's actually a lot more going on in the background, as we're going to cover. They also didn't tell us that the demon emperors volunteered to give up their memories and go along with Ray's plans. Think about that. Everyone except, actually, maybe also Mel Hayes. Maybe also Mel Hayes. It's kind of unclear, but let's assume the 6 ones that had Canon's origins guiding their thoughts. And remember, in guiding those thoughts, you have the situation that created Misha and Sasha. What does that say about Canon? Oh, he's just pretty naive and he's not very good at managing people's expectations or managing people's future behaviors. Actually, if you look at the whole series and you see how Canon was ultimately betrayed by the humans, it does just go to show you that Canon is exceedingly naive and he does not have a very good handle on what people are capable of. So he's not the kind of person that you should let have any kind of plan that revolves around public perception of any kind of person. If you let Canon have that kind of control, the entire story is telling you, no, he is objectively the worst person to have when you're trying to guide people's thoughts and actions. Anyway, going back to this, the Demon Emperors had given up their memories and they volunteered to. And here were Canon's or Ray's words for this particular part. I fused 6 of my origins with the 7 Demon Emperors. Of course, it was with their consent, and their memories were voluntarily wiped as well. 2,000 years later, they knew you'd come into contact with them and notice the fusion, so they wiped their own memories so that they could not lie to you. So think about that. Think about how aggressive that move is. That these guys are like, yo, yeah, man, we love you, Canon. We're gonna join up with you. Hey, we can't lie to Anos, so you got to get rid of our memories. That completely changes everything about who's at fault here for the absolute atrocities that occur under the Demon's watch. And in this case, the atrocity that we are aware of is Misha and Sasha. That was a pretty terrible situation to have. And then, of course, the whole thing with the hybrids and how the hybrids are treated. At the end of the day, you have people like Emilia coming out of the woodwork. This is not one of the best societies that you could have. Not the worst, but still kind of concerning because they do go away from Anos' core values. When you look back at episode 1 and you see Anos' core values about valuing people, and you see how the stories have changed, definitely the Avos that the demons end up with is not as awesome as the Anos of reality. And that is something that is worth criticism when it comes to what the heck were you doing, Ray, when you were one of the the head people of the demons or whatever. Next, they skip the part where Anos pretended to try to kill the humans by dropping giant meteors of fire and lightning on them, I believe. And he did that so that Ray could pretend to protect them, because Anos has a pretty good idea of how people actually behave, and so he was going very far to make sure that Ray didn't have to suffer anymore. Next up, they skipped Anos hearing Ray's pain through, I think, a connection from one of the spells they were using. Maybe it might have been Guise. Anyway, that whole monologue that Ray had in the anime, Anos actually heard all of that. He knows where Ray's feelings actually are. And the reason that had to happen was because of Misfit of Demon King Academy's web novel is in the first person. So a lot of times the only way you're going to hear about characters' inner thoughts is for Anos himself to hear them. So that's why you had that phenomena occur in the web novel. For the anime, you see Ray's thought. What's important is that ultimately that's there for you to know what Ray is thinking. And it's just the only thing that changes is just whether or not Anos knows, but you should know Anos knows. Next up, they glossed over Elio. So this was the only other guy in the anime episode that was worthwhile. You saw him kneeling to Anos later, but did you know that that's actually the person in charge of the city that has the school in it? Did you know that that's actually Emilia's father? You know, the teacher? That's her father. And they also skipped over his part where he was bowing in front of Anos, and they had a nice chat about how Anos was saying, like, yeah, this is a pretty good city, and they pretty much reconciled. Like, Anos likes him. Like, he's a cool guy. He seems a lot more reasonable than Emilia does. So it's kind of unfortunate that you didn't get this particular storyline coming through. Next, they skipped the part where Ray went to Diego and had Diego try to lift Evan Ma only to get rejected by the sword. So this was kind of important because what the anime episode decided to do was just, paint Diego with one brush of insanity and being consumed by hatred. When you had Canon trying to prove to Diego that he wasn't a good person, that was still Canon trying to make a point to everyone around them. So you missed this awesome moment where the sword itself, like their symbol, rejects a person, and then Diego cut off the arm of one of the soldiers. Like, you missed that, right? And that's much more of an interesting situation than a guy just monologuing and going crazy. Like, we've seen Diego's forever before, so it's unfortunate the anime had to go in that direction, but this is like one of the understandable changes. Like, you could have gotten rid of that, but it's still an issue of like, well, shit, well, this isn't as cool as it could have been. Okay, next is one of the actually critical points. They didn't cover that the Sasha Misha fusion destroyed 10,000 self-destruct spells instantly with her Eyes of Destruction. And they didn't cover that they destroyed Jurga's 36 attempts at magic spells and some other magic. So the reason that this one is important is specifically because this is what one of the earlier episodes was building up to. Specifically, the one episode where Anos was telling Sasha that one day she might have to be there to protect people that when he won't be around. This was the culmination for that particular plot line. But what the anime chose to do was somehow have Sasha Misha fusion freezing the spell, which doesn't make sense when you consider what the Eyes of Destruction actually do. So, and then in that moment, they had Ray actually be the one with Misa's help to deal with it. No, 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 no. I understand that the anime was trying to like wrap things up there and make people look useful, but those characters had other things to do. Misa did not have an issue. She did not need the screen time. That was a follow-up for Sasha specifically. And we'll talk about that at the end because there's another moment like this that kind of like falls apart because of what the anime chooses not to do. They didn't cover weird exposition that Jurga had towards Misa's abilities, and I'll quote it here. Is this the ability of the Great Spirit Forest Guardian? Are the spirits siding with the demons? Now think about that. Think about the magnitude of that line. You have Misa using her ability, and Jurga's like, yo, is this the Spirit Forest Guardian? Well, that already tells you, like, who the heck is Misa's mother, right? Who is her father? Is it Shin now because a sword got left behind? Maybe. Or is it Midhaze? Melhaze? Melhaze maybe is his name? Is it him? Because he was in the forest. Like, we don't know. It's kind of hard to tell, but that was a pretty good mystery. Like, that point is still... it's still active. Next, there was a part with Eleanor in the anime where Anos has said a certain thing. What they're trying to say with that moment that Eleanor pops up is that Eleanor, you know what, I'm just going to quote Anos. Eleanor is made from Jurga's origin. She continued to desire peace no matter how many times she was erased and remade. Jurga was to kill the demons and Eleanor was to wish for the peace of his descendants. These two opposing things are nothing but the emotional conflict in Jurga's mind. So when you look at the actual line of dialogue that Anos had, and you take that into consideration, you can see the inference. When Anos is doubting that Jurga was nothing but hatred, he's acknowledging that that's what ultimately created Eleanor. Now, they don't cover it, but I believe Eleanor came out as a woman, maybe because of Jurga's love towards his own wife. That might be what shaped it, but I'm not too sure. Next up, there's a portion where the Demon King castle just shows up out of nowhere. And of course, you should just assume Anos can summon it. But he used origin magic to summon it, so it was quite a bit of a thing. But they didn't cover a very critical detail. They didn't cover that Jurga knew Anos couldn't use his destruction sword outside of the castle. So they didn't cover a future plot point, or a plot point that built for the future. Here is a quote. Your castle isn't here. You don't have... There is... Oh, Jesus. There is a ghetto? Without it, you cannot pull out that demon sword trump card of yours. Anos is like, oh? I've never shown you my principle destroying sword. Who told you about it? And then Anos does a quick narration. Those from the Age of Myths know that my Demon King castle is a three-dimensional magic formation, but everyone who knows of my sword's existence should have died. In other words, when Anos only brings out that sword to kill people. So, what ultimately got skipped is the build-up for Season 2, or for the continuation of the story. Next up, they skipped how much respect Elio was actually giving Eleanor. Like, Eleanor's actions had a huge impact. You can kind of see that from the anime, but it was cool to see how much praise she got. And unfortunately, that got skipped. That's one of the understandable things, though, because they still managed to maintain some of the spirit of that. Next up, they didn't cover Anos' message to Jurga. The best that the anime did was that moment where he thought he threw the shells towards Jurga's face, but you missed some of the extra nuance. Anos said, "Reincarnate as many times as you like and come to kill me. I'll keep you and your revenge company for all of eternity." He stuck the sword in his chest. "For as long as even a fragment of the hatred you carried right to your death remains. Just like I did with his wife and child, I cast silica on his origin just as it was about to disappear." So this just followed up on that idea that Anos was casting reincarnation magic on anyone that was wearing those little seashell necklaces. "And until you meet your wife and child again, I'll cast reincarnation as many times as required." So what you had there was Anos taking responsibility for the things that he ultimately caused. And you lose that nuance there when it comes to the fight with Jurga, which is unfortunate. It is sincerely unfortunate that you lose that nuance to Anos' character. They skipped Elio and Anos talking, I got that. They skipped Anos having a moment with one of the fan union girls, Ellen. So when the girls were going to have their song, they skip a lot of the little details that really make you think like, oh, Anos really cares about these girls. For instance, Anos had told the girls to sing song number 4. Think about what that means. Anos, when he told these girls that he wouldn't forget their contributions to helping his mom, he was right. Like, he knows these girls' songs by number. Think about that. Think about how cool that is. Anyway, one of the girls, Ellen, had an extra moment with Anos. And I think he went and said, Ellen, when I was last alive, there weren't many songs around, and I never heard the type of songs you guys sing at all. They're jokey, ridiculous, and somehow disdainful of others. Such songs can only exist if it's peaceful. And that's like what Anos takes away from that. In other words, he appreciates the songs because, like his mother's cooking, they are a product of a peaceful world. And you miss that extra little bit of subtext. Like, heck, if we're talking about what you can remove and give back, like, remove those sequences of where you have the girl singing and just give us a little sequence where he's appreciating the freaking song, man, right? Like, at the very least. And finally, the most critical thing, the masked man that you see at the tournament wasn't Ray. So this is what Anos had said. Oh yeah, what was that other mask of yours with a different shape? In reference to the one he saw at the tournament. He reached out his hand to Ray. Different shape, Ray asks. Ray cocks his head in confusion. I only had one mask. And then Anos is just like, the masked man from the Demon Sword tournament wore a different mask to the one that Ray wore today. There's a number of possibilities, but none of them are good. Now, mind you, very possible that that wasn't in the web novel, but they've really stripped a lot of the different things. At the very least, the original iteration of the story believed this. Now, before going into like talking about why this is important that they skipped this, one more thing, they didn't explain Anos's power properly, the one that actually revived him from death. And so this power is kind of complicated because it requires some timing. So origin magic, origin regeneration, agromot, we're gonna call it aggro. Let's call it aggro because I can't pronounce it. After receiving an attack on my origin, it returns it to the state before it was injured. Okay, so that part was covered in the anime. Normally, if your origin disappears, so does your magic. So, just before an opponent attacks you, you send aggro to the future using libido, where it regenerates your origin. So think about that. What this actually required was Anos timing this perfectly and sending magic to the future, because otherwise you can't cast the magic. Because you have to know your opponent's attack, and because you need to know that they are targeting your origin, it's only usable from the second attack onwards. Even if Evan Maz destroys my origin, I could revive now because Evan Maz pierced my origin 200 years ago to transfer magic to me. So there you go. Quite a lot of things were missed. Now, to talk about the parts that really kind of just botched the adaptation, it comes back to Sasha and Misha's moment where they're canceling everything, and it comes back to that thing with the build up towards the next season. With Sasha and Misha, the problem is you can't set up a plot line and then not make it clear when that plot line is fulfilled. You can't tell Sasha one day her demon eyes are going to be useful in a moment when Anos isn't around and then take away the fulfillment of that moment. You can't have a thing where Sasha and Misha's fusion is holding back a magic instead of just doing what they originally did, which was use the destruction eyes to their proper nature to cancel out all the spells. That is significantly more impressive than them holding back magic with a spell that we've never heard of before. Have you heard of any kind of delay spell before? No, you've heard of the demon eyes that can just destroy stuff. That's what you use them for. That's what you have them for, where Jurga is telling them, like, hey, you can't use anti-magic forever. That's how you build up the stakes. Them wanting to use Ray again for that particular portion of him taking out the Zestias was just a little bit unreasonable. So this is an unfortunate thing. There isn't a natural fulfillment of Sasha's build-up in the previous chapters. So when you're looking at a self-contained story, you know, it's better in the volumes, but it sucks in the anime. When it comes to Ray, not following up on the mask plot point, if this is a plot point in the light novels, is ridiculous. The mask at the demon tournament is one of the things that got readers away from Ray. Are you not? What happens if you have that question, like, well, okay, what's going on with the Demon Sword tournament? What's going on there? Was that like somehow a clone? Like, did Ray make one of his origins go possess someone so that he can show up at the tournament for some reason? And it's like, Well, you could, yeah, maybe that could work, right? Because the magic's so undefined that you could be like, yeah, that could legitimately work. But then you look at this and it's like, wait. So the guy actually didn't. He wasn't the guy at the tournament. Well, that kind of changes everything. And as Anno says, that seems like that could be a really terrible situation. And when you consider that, and you consider the information about Shin and the people that left the country, well, that ultimately tells you: is the anime does the anime actually think they're getting a season 2? Because everything that could point to season 2 or to future plot threads for season 2, that is the identity of the mask, the identity of Misa's mother, the location of the other demon loyalist, and the other demon tribes that Ray specifically said were not going to get involved until the situation with Anos was cleared and sorted. You have these four prominent plot points that Ray brings up at the end of this volume, and they're not being followed up on. That speaks to me of people who do not think they're getting a season 2 or are not sure of it yet, which is really interesting given how this thing was marketed at the very beginning. This might be a situation similar to Mahoka, where they don't get a season 2 until like years later, so that might be why they're not following up on these plot points. Now, in terms of speaking of the episode as a proper review, we are going to get to that point now. Well, with the stuff that we have left, it's just an entertaining episode. The battle portion itself, Ray versus Anos. Sorry, there's so many names I have to remember here. Ray versus Anos. I think that was pretty good. It was cool to see all the stuff. Like, it would have been nice to just remind us what all the magics that were being used were, because there were some origin killers being mixed in there. Like, whatever. Like, they're not going to explain the magic. They rarely ever explain the magic, so that's something I've just given up on. That's just consistent with the adaptation. One of my favorite parts is where Ray was talking about why he's going to save Anos, like how he can't wait for somebody else to show up. And I hope you guys caught that, because that's why Ray fell in love with Misa. It's because of that line that he was regurgitating to Anos about this girl. She was powerless, but she wasn't going to wait for anyone else to come and help when she could come out and help. That's what motivated Ray forward. That's what really helped him take that next step. So as canon, that's why across all his lifetimes, it's ultimately Misa that he falls in love with, because it's like she's the one giving him a new perspective. And it's again speaking like canon still has a lot of areas to grow. He's an idealistic hero, and the volume made that very clear. Like, one of the big things you have to take away from this is that canon and Ray are ultimately very naive, and so they aren't very well equipped to deal with some of these like more subtle issues. Throughout the what was skipped stuff, I was able to explain to you guys where things had gone awry and what exactly was lost of the characters. For this episode, there were a lot of moments that were conveyed through imagery that maybe you may not be able to pick up on, and there were moments that were just flat out removed. What's left of the episode is ultimately just something that moves by so quickly that you can really only just go with it, which is times unfortunate. Jurga's plight ultimately here. Jurga was motivated by extreme hatred towards Anos because his wife and his son went down. Anos remembered them, and that's why ultimately Anos has that final nuance line. One of the things that they wanted to convey to you as well for this episode, when it looks at what the anime was doing, they wanted to convey to you that hate just makes someone really unreasonable, and in this case it made Diego really unreasonable. But there's not really much you can talk about when you have a caricature like Diego. When you have Diego having a spasm over how much he hates Anos, it's like there's nothing of interest there. What's interesting is having a sword that's your symbol reject you, because that's teaching you in a way that your enemy having a speech towards you can't. So, what ultimately we have in Demon Lord, the final episode, is like, it's an exciting episode, it's bombastic, it's entertaining. The Misha Sasha fusion was legitimately surprising. It would have been nice if it got proper, if it got a little bit more going on. But yeah, it's a bombastic episode that ultimately simplifies the characters in response for making everything flashy. And the anime tries to convey some of the higher thoughts with imagery, but without giving people enough information of what's possible and what isn't. how are you going to build the proper inferences? Like right now, the most tragic thing is that people are going to infer that because Canon has origin shenanigans, that he was probably the guy standing at the Demon Sword tournament, where that isn't the case. Think about how fundamentally screwed up you are, that one of the inferences that your viewers are going to make is going to be fundamentally wrong because you never choose to cover it. That's one of the most unreasonable things to me in this particular anime. Now, I will say that final sequence where the parents are talking to Anos, that is not in the web novel, but I like it. I really like it. I think that's one of the sections that they added that was actually really, really good. Other things that I'm really curious about is like Emilia and her father. Her father is super reasonable. I'm really excited to see how this Emilia thing is going to work out in the future. Any other things to really point out here? No real other things to point out. I hope you guys enjoy. Anyway, at the end of the day, what do we get in the finale? It's just a really fast-paced action battle where things are tied up as well as they can, and the things that they don't tie up, they don't let you know that they are something that they have to tie up. That's how the anime gets around this. They simplify the majority of the characters, and they don't tell you the things that are actually super concerning. It's going to be really interesting if we get season 2. I really do hope we get season 2 though, because this was really good. But again, I can't stress this enough. The things that they chose to skip, if they knew they were having a season 2, I don't think they would have skipped those. Anyway, everyone, let me know what you thought down below. Until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.